Nothing ever has a real beginning, but the story has to start somewhere. I'll start with the breeder. The breeder was a younger son in a big family, and there was no place for him on his father's farm. He decided to seek his own land, and in the early northern summer, when the days never end, he wandered out in the wilderness westwards towards the distant mountains. He wandered for days. Finally he came to a small lake protected by hills from the harsh northy and westy winds. A meadow with fresh grass on fertile black soil gently sloped towards the shore, where the calm mirroring surface of the lake was constantly broken by numerous jumping fish. He decided that this was a good place to settle. He started to dig ditches and built a simple but solid log cabin. He lived on fish from the lake and hares from the woods, and later, when the fall came near, he started to gather supplies for the winter. That winter was unusually cold, and many a day he had to stay inside by the fire. His loneliness was terrible, without limit, and in the moonlight nights he could hear his brothers the wolves howl from the woods and mountains around him. Then he went out and answered them with lonesome, desperate howls until he tired out and fell into a dreamless sleep. Soon he realized that no man can live isolated and alone. In the spring he wandered toward his home village. He knew what he was looking for, and he found her. The breeder's woman was young and strong and willing to follow him. They returned to their distant home, leading a pregnant heifer and an oxen loaded with seed. And they began their task. The breeder was indefatigable. His manhood was bent and knobby like a juniper stick, and always moisty and trembling with readiness. And she, when she was walking with bare feet and swinging buttocks over the grass, was like a fertile goddess grown from the earth itself. Her juicy bosom was like an overflowing horn of plenty. Always prepared, she met him, screaming with lust, in long, wild embraces. And their offspring were countless. They built and broke new soil, and soon my home village was standing there as their nameless monument. "3 weeks before my birth was expected, my mother had to bring supplies to my father, who was working in the woods in a place too far away to come home in the evenings. It was in the early spring, so early that the signs of awakening life were noticeable only through the amorous blackcocks playing on the open snowfields in a distant bog. My mother was driving a light sleigh dragged by her old, calm mare. She was the only horse left at home since my father brought the 2 younger ones with him into the woods. The timber road was narrow, and when she met the timber load, she had to get off the road into the loose, deep snow at the side. A couple of warmer days had made the snow soft, and the mare sank down to her belly. My mother tried to shovel and drag her loose. The strain started the labor that would bring me into this world. Everything went very fast, but fortunately my uncle drove by and he helped free me from my mother's clothes. Very gently he cut my navel string with his big leather-handled hunting knife, once forged by my grandfather. Another bypasser fetched my father, and he came. He wrapped me in his warm wolfskin waistcoat and put me to bed in an emptied food basket. While others were born under screams of pain in prolonged agony in dark, stifling bedrooms, I rushed into the world under the light blue sky of the early spring, welcomed by intoxicated playing blackcocks and brought home in a wolf's fur on a bed of frozen tree moss. My grandfather was a small farmer with a big family to support. They had just lived through a winter that had been extremely long, dark and cold. When the spring finally came, there was not much to eat in the house. He decided to take his rifle and go out into the woods to see if he could find anything edible to shoot. The day was bright and the heaven high and light blue. The air was clean and the woods were heavily scented with pine tree hearts and thawing mud. Suddenly he was standing at the shore of a small lake, a black eye in the deep green face of the pine wood. Not the slightest movement could be seen on the surface of the water, so recently freed from its thick cover of ice. And in the middle of the lake, as a single white spot in the black, a lonely swan, newly arrived from its southern dwelling to this silent land. Without thinking or hesitating, he lifted his rifle to shoot at the swan, and then he experienced something that happens to very few people. Mortally wounded, the swan was singing its swan song, a vibrating outlet of pure sorrow, ending in a long dissolving tone, whereafter the swan dived under the surface and was no more to be seen. My grandfather went homewards with hesitating, heavy steps, and his hair had turned white. After that day, he remained a depressed and silent man, and sorrow never left his eyes. After listening to the swan song, no man will ever be the same again. He has found himself standing helpless and without protection at the edge of the pit of the big silence, where you are forced to look down into the never-ending ocean of eternity, where time and space no longer exist. At an age of 5 months and 17 days, I was carried by my mother in a ship basket out in the woods as she went out to gather moss for the winter. And the fairy king crept out from among the pine trees to drip his bitterly intoxicating fluid on my tongue. And suddenly, my soul overflowed by countless generations' memories of hunger, cold, and darkness, but also blind and inexorable lust of life. And under it, and beyond it, unrestrainable, the song. During the winter, when I was 6 years old, my mother became ill. Her illness got worse and worse. Her face was often red with fever. She was coughing a lot, and everything she did took longer and longer. My father finally managed to persuade her to go to a doctor in town. When they came back, my father took me aside and said, "Your mother is very ill. She has tuberculosis and must go to the sanatorium in town for a while." The next day she packed a small suitcase and went away. She was away for more than a year. Then she came home for a short leave and went back again. In the years to come, she would come home for a couple of weeks' leave now and then. Each time she was thinner and more tired. She spent almost all time in bed. I was not allowed to go into her bedroom, but could stand in the open doorway to talk with her. She didn't have the strength to speak much. The last time she came home, she was very thin and pale. Her skin was white like the skin of a dead fish. Occasional fever roses bloomed on her cheeks. Her beautiful dark red hair had become thin and lusterless and was clinging to her head like withered grass. Her breasts had almost disappeared. Because they had taken out her ribs on the left side, her chest was sunken and had caved in so it nearly touched her back. She had been sent home to die. It looked better in the papers and was less frightening to future patients if people were sent home as recovered rather than to die there. Nobody told me anything. I was 9 years old and not supposed to understand. But children know. Especially since I overheard my mother's Aunt Ebba saying, "It can't be long now. When you hold her arm, marks from your fingers remain. Her skin is not smoothing out. The marks stay." One day my father said, "Listen, I've spoken with your friend Ruben's father, and he wants to take you and Ruben fishing tomorrow." When I came back from the fishing trip, my mother was gone. They had taken her to my grandfather's house to die, and they wanted to spare me the pain of the farewell. They had taken her bed, mattress, pillow, and bedclothes out in the yard and burned them. I was standing there in tears, looking at a pile of ashes. I really had wanted to say goodbye. I never forgave my father for not understanding and taking her away as he did. Now my relation to my mother remains unfinished forever. You can't comfort a loved one who is about to die, but you can assure her that your soul is walking at her side on her last journey towards the land where the cold is eternal and the darkness without end. Now my village is dead. No one lives there anymore, and the wilderness is taking back the ground it was with so much hard labor deprived of. We cannot and will not live as our forefathers did. As I slowly walk around there, looking at the overgrown fields and the empty windows and collapsed roofs, I can hear the wailing of the breeder, his sons and grandsons in many generations, from their forgotten dwellings under the surface of the earth. They lived without great dreams or hopes, and their only goal was to keep themselves and their offspring alive. They made no marks in history or culture. Even their marks on the land itself were small. They wandered with light feet on the surface of the earth and made the soil rest lightly over them.